As I've mentioned in the past, Ari Lipsky started sending me a weekly shir that he puts together. So he has a very nice piece on whether one should say Ba'omer or La'omer when counting the Omer. Do I have one on this yet? Okay, good. So whether you should, when one counts the Omer, should one say Ba'omer or La'omer? Is there any advantage? And what's even the hezber of the machlokas, whether you say Ba'omer or La'omer? Especially the Mechaber, when he refers to the day of Lag Ba'omer, the Mechaber in Siman Tav Tzadi Gimel, Seif Beis writes, Nohagim shalol lehistaper ad Lag La'omer. That the minig is that we don't take a haircut until Lag La'omer. You know, the holiday that we call Lag La'omer. The thing is, nobody calls it Lag La'omer except for the Mechaber. We always call it Lag Be'omer. So the Mechaber seems to, by virtue of calling it Lag La'omer, seems to be assuming that's the way we're supposed to refer to days of the Omer. So when you go back to Tav Pei Tes, where the Mechaber describes the mitzvah of counting, so he writes, B'lal Sheni Achar Tfil Zarvis Maschil Lispar Omer, etc. U'mitzvah al kol echad lispar la'atzmo, v'tzarech lispar mu'umar l'varich tchila. And he goes on and he says that the way to count is, he says, Keitzad, B'yom Arishon Omer, Hayom Yom Echad, Ad Shemagil Zayin Yomim. You should say Hayom Yom Echad on the first night of the Omer, and the second night of Yom Yom Sheni. Until you get to the seventh day of the Omer, then you say Shiva Yomim Shem Shavua Echad. And he doesn't include what you should say next. Should you say Ba'omer, La'omer? So it seems that the Rama adds the word Ba'omer in both of those places. Hayom Yom Echad, Ba'omer. That you should say Yom Echad, Ba'omer. The Mishabur on the spot says, Uberov Poskim Hanusach Lomar, Hanusach La'omer. And Rov Poskim, the Nusach is not Ba'omer, but it's La'omer. However, he says, Iker Davar Zeh Einu Ala L'chadchila, Ketei Levar Shu Monu Miyom Shekrivu Asa Omer, V'hala V'im Lo Omer L'Hayom Kach V'kach Nami Yatza. This whole issue of whether you say La'omer, Ba'omer, it's really only a din L'chadchila. Really, if you skip it entirely, you just count. You just say like the Mechaber says, Hayom Yom Echad, really you Yotzei the mitzvah. So the whole discussion is only a discussion in a very L'chadchila kind of way. What's the best way to count the Omer? The Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Tav Pei Tes says that it's better to say La'omer, and Mishnah Berurah seems to assume that way as well, because he says that's the Rov HaPoskim. The question is, what's it about? Why would a La'omer or Ba'omer be different? So Ari put together 4 different shitos over here as to what the difference might be. So one is that La'omer has a connotation of looking retrospectively, of going back in time, whereas Ba'omer is in the present moment. So the Taz seems to assume this way. He seems to assume that Ba'omer is the correct nusach, because the first night of Sfiras HaOmer is the 16th day of Nisan. Now what are we counting from? We're counting from, why is it called Sfiras HaOmer? What's the Omer? The Omer is the Karban Omer. When do we bring the Karban Omer? On the second day of Pesach, right? Second day of Pesach, during the daytime, not at nighttime. When do we count the Omer at first? First time we count the Omer is the night before we bring the Karban Omer. So how on the first night of the Omer, the night of the 16th, can you say La Omer when the Omer hasn't even been brought yet? You can't be looking retrospectively La Omer on the first night because you haven't done anything yet. You haven't brought the actual Karban yet. So Taz says it makes sense that initially the mitzvah was to say Be'omer, that today is the day where it's going to be the Omer, and then once you do it that way the first day, so then you should continue to do that way. One might argue that nowadays it's different because nowadays we don't have the Karban anymore. We're not counting from a Karban, so maybe that's why it changed to La Omer from Ba'omer, because everything is retrospective nowadays. Everything is going back to the time, as a Zechar, to the time when we had the Beis Mikdash and we had the Karban. Furthermore, another possibility is there is a well-known machlokas Rishonim whether the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer B'zman Hazeh is a mitzvah d'oraisa or a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. The Rambam holds even now, absent the Karban Omer, the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer is still a mitzvah d'oraisa, but the majority of Rishonim believe that it's a mitzvah midrabbanan. It seems that we paskin that it's a mitzvah midrabbanan to count the Omer. That's why some people have, Rav Sturmbach writes that he doesn't like the nusach in the L'Shem Yichud, leaving even out the L'Shem Yichud part of it, but the Hinni Muchan and Mezuman, that what does a person say? It says in the Siddur that you're prepared to be Mekayim the mitzvah K'moshe Nemer b'Torah or something like that, like it says in the Torah, Svartim L'Chem. So Sturmbach says maybe we shouldn't say like that. We shouldn't say that we're about to be Mekayim the mitzvah as it says in the Torah, because we paskin Sfiras Omer is the Rabban. Rabbanan. So we're not about to be Mekayim the mitzvah like it says in the Torah. The only way to be Mekayim the mitzvah the way it says in the Torah is by actually having a Korban Omer. So he suggests a slight modification of that paragraph for those who are noeg to say that paragraph at all. But anyway, there is this machlokas, whether it's a din d'oraisa or a din d'rabbanan. So Rav Shechter, Mipnei Arav, quotes from Rav Soloveitchik that maybe the machlokas, whether you say ba omer or la omer, parallels the machlokas whether it's d'oraisa or d'rabbanan. La omer, again, is retrospective. It's looking back. So that would refer back to the time when we had a Korban Omer. Ba omer doesn't refer to the Korban Omer, refers to a present counting as being the ikr, that right now, this is it. This counting is counting for real. This is the real mitzvah midaraisa, and that would imply it's daraisa. If that's the case, it would seem la omer would be more correct, because we paskin Sfiras Omer is the Rabbanan Bizman Hazeh, so it would seem that la omer would be the more correct explanation, the more correct nusach to use. Another possible explanation is probably the most well-known machlokas in regard to Sfiras Omer is, what if you miss one night of Syria, an entire day of Svera? So machlokas rishonim, can you continue to count the subsequent nights with the bracha? Do you still have a mitzvah? The machlokas rishonim is there any point in counting the subsequent nights, or did you blow it? You missed it. You missed out on the entire mitzvah. So the way the machlokas is typically explained is that if you hold that you continue to count the other nights, that's because you hold that each night is a separate mitzvah. But if you hold that once you missed one day, you missed everything, and there's no sense in continuing to count, that's because you hold that it's really one big mitzvah, and you're missing a key component of the mitzvah in the middle. So once the mitzvah is missing that day, so the whole mitzvah is destroyed. You're not going to accomplish anything by going on to do the mitzvah. So what do we paskin? We paskin safek, that it's machlokas, and therefore we try to be machmir misafek. So if a person misses one night of Svera, and the entire day, let's keep it uncomplicated now, a person misses an entire day of Svera, so we still count but without a bracha, right? Because it's a safek. This is the well-known machlokas, whether it's one big mitzvah or 49 separate mitzvahs. Rav Shechter writes in Eretz HaTzvi, wait a second, if it's one big mitzvah, why do we make a separate bracha on each and every night? Each and every night there's a separate birchas mitzvah. If it's one big mitzvah, how could we say Asher Kishon Tzon 49 times? So he points out that in general, whenever we talk about a birchas mitzvah is always on a maisa mitzvah. The birchas mitzvah is not on the kiyuma mitzvah, it's on the maisa mitzvah. So yes, there's one big kiyuma mitzvah, but it's 49 separate maaseh mitzvah, and therefore we make 49 separate brachas. But maybe that's what's behind this nusach change as well. Maybe ba'omer would be indicating that we think Svera is one big mitzvah. It refers to the fact that this day is one day in the overall big mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer, whereas La Omer would indicate that each day is a separate mitzvah, and each one relates to the Korban Omer, that I'm going back to the Korban Omer, and that's why today is special. Whereas Ba Omer is this moment as part of the greater Svera is an important moment. Not only its particular relationship to the Korban Omer. That one's a little bit hard to understand, because one could argue with the flip side also. Pashtos, that doesn't really connect to the nusach. Another explanation that Ari suggests, maybe based on the Brisker Rav. I don't think the Brisker Rav makes this connection. I don't remember. I didn't get a chance to look it up. But the Brisker Rav points out that the Rambam holds Svera Bizman Hazeh is da'oraisa, right? So the Brisker Rav points out that the Gemara Maseches Menachos in Daf Samach Vav has a comment that a Meimar would only count the days of the Omer, not the weeks, because it's only a Zechar. That we're not doing the mitzvah is only a Zechar, and therefore you only count the days and not the weeks. So it sounds from the Gemara that if the mitzvah Sfiras Omer is da'oraisa, so we count days and weeks. But if you hold it's only d'Rabbanan, then it's only a commemoration of what we used to do. So then you would only count the days, you wouldn't count the weeks. But why? Generally speaking, when the Rabbanan make a din called the Tikkun Rabbanan, ken da'oraisa tikkunim. The Rabbanan always pattern their halachas after dinim da'oraisa. So why, just because it's a din Rabbanan, would you do the mitzvah differently? So the Brisker Rav explains that there are two types of Zechar the Mikdash that we have. We have one type of Zechar Mikdash where we do a certain act to remember that since the mitzvah is not here anymore, we still want to remember how to do the mitzvah. So we continue to mimic the original mitzvah by doing it in the same way that the mitzvah used to be done, because we want to retain a familiarity with the mitzvahs. But there are other types of Zechar Mikdash where Chazal wanted us to remember how things functioned in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, not so that we'll still remember how to do it, but just to remind us that we don't have it anymore. What's the first thing we say right after Svera Omer? It's printed in the Siddur. Harachaman hu yachzor lanu avodas Beis Hamikdash l'kom meher v'yameinu. Why? Why do we say Harachaman that Hashem should bring back the Beis Hamikdash? Because we're emphasizing that whatever we have now, it's not the full mitzvah. It's not as good as it could have been, and that's what the purpose of the Zechar. That the Zechar is not to just keep us familiar and just keep it exactly parallel. No, the purpose of the Zechar is to realize that what we're doing now is an imitation of the original mitzvah. It's not the real original mitzvah. So maybe that's the machlokas in the Gemara about what type of commemorate. Maybe everyone agrees it's Rabbanan, but the machlokas is what type of commemoration is this? Is Svera Omer? The Rav Soloveitchik termed this a little differently. Is it what you would call the first type, which is Zechar Mikdash, a way to remember how we did things at the Beis Hamikdash, or is it, as Rav Soloveitchik said, a Zechar l'Churban? It's a way to remind us about the Churban, about the fact that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, not a Zechar to what was done in the Beis Hamikdash, a Zechar to the fact that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. So based on this, maybe that's the difference in the nuschos between Lo Omer or Ba Omer. Maybe they're both about a din d'Rabbanan. Lo Omer refers back to the Karban Omer, as we keep on saying. So that would be, if it's all about referring back to the Karban Omer, we would want to mimic the way the Omer was counted back then. When we're saying Ba Omer, we're referring to our current reality. Our current reality is that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, and that's what we're emphasizing. We don't have a Karban Omer, and that's what we're emphasizing when we count Svera. So that's a possible suggestion of what's behind the Nusach. Either way, again, you yotze the mitzvah, whether you say Lo Omer, whether you say Ba Omer, or whether you say nothing. They say that Rav Soloveitchik and his uncle, the Brisker Rav, also used to say both. They used to say the nusach of Lo Omer, Ba Omer. Soloveitchik had a lot of chumras like this. This is a classic brisker chumrah, and even something very minor in halacha to be extra makbid to make sure that you cover both deos. To say both shoes. Rav Soloveitchik used to say in Ashrei, Zechar Rav Tuvcha Yabiu and Zechar Rav Tuvcha Yabiu. He'd say the pasuk twice every time he'd say Ashrei. Unbelievable chumras on things that you would think, how much does it really affect? Are we so makbid on pronouncing every word exactly right in all of our davening? Zechar doesn't even make a difference. Okay, so he had such a hakpada that he would say both Lo Omer and Ba Omer. Which one would come first? So logically, and I think this is what Soloveitchik would do, was that he would juxtapose the Lo Omer that refers back to the Karban Omer with how did he do? I think he would say Ba Omer would be right after the bracha, and Lo Omer would be the one that's a Zechar back to the Karban Omer, because he wanted to juxtapose that with the Arachim and the Yachzal and Beis Hamikdash Koma. So that's why he would say it in that order. But again, that does not seem like it's a chumrah that the rove of the world has taken on or necessarily should take on. It was Soloveitchik had a lot of chumras that were appropriate for people with the last name Soloveitchik that may not be appropriate for everybody, but this is the some ideas about what might be behind these different nuschos. Okay.